Well, I haven't met you yet. My name is Kyle Isabelli. I'm the senior pastor here at Avenue Christian, and just so grateful that we got to share in this today. You know, I've been at the church for 5 years here, and but it's so cool for many of you to be able to see this long-standing couple that has served the Lord well overseas in various contexts, and for 40 years. Some of you were here before they were here. And your faithfulness to generously supporting them, welcoming them in, and just being a brother and sister in Christ. It's just so cool. So I just want to personally thank you for that investment in Kyle and Kathy and many other mission partners, mission organizations over the years. And as we begin this series on Jonah today, sometimes when we hear about people like Jonah, or we think about someone like Kyle and Kathy who have served overseas in Southeast Asia for 40 years. Sometimes it feels like, man, first of all, that's amazing. You know, the work that they did or how God called them and used them in some mighty ways, it's awesome. We're in awe of that, and we're in awe of who God is and how God works in people. And we want to celebrate that. We want to honor that. And so as Sherry said, love for you to join us after the service in the fellowship hall. We'll have cake. Just talk to Kyle and Kathy, connect with other people, whatever it is. Love for you just to be there afterwards and just to honor them and thank them. But the second kind of maybe thought we have then is, well, I could never do that. Like that just seems way too hard to go to a different country or to even hear from God that I'm supposed to go somewhere else. Like that just seems overwhelming. I could never think about doing something like that, or wanting to even uproot my family and try to go somewhere else like that. And then to have that type of impact, to be somewhere for 40 years doing the same thing, and it just feels like a lot. It seems like a lot. Well, I think Kyle and Kathy would be the first to share with you. And if you weren't here a couple Sundays ago on September 4th, Kyle shared his story, shared his testimony of kind of how the Lord was working their lives. And I think they would be the first to say that they're just ordinary people like you and I. They're all created in God's image, all have the opportunity to respond to the gospel, the good news of Jesus' death and resurrection that saves us and redeems us and gives us the opportunity to be in right relationship with God the Father. I think they would say that, hey, I got the same blood running through my veins as you do, maybe a different type, but the same overall blood, and same content of water in my body. Like we would say, we're just ordinary people. They're just ordinary people. And even a guy like Jonah is just an ordinary guy. All of us created by the same creator in his image. All saying, you know what? What can God do in my life to do some extraordinary things? And I think all of us can ask that question of ourselves this morning, but we don't have to necessarily feel like, that they're someone that is different, like they are special, that God is going to do even greater things in them because of how he created them versus how he created me. I don't think that's the case at all. I think they would be the first ones to say that's not the case at all, that they're ordinary, that they're just like us. You know, in this story of Jonah, we've seen it a lot, maybe you've heard it a lot. No matter if you've been a Christian your entire life or if you're new to the Christian faith, everyone's kind of heard of Jonah. Maybe it's the cinematic, very powerful depiction we saw at the beginning, or some of these images are thrown up on the screen. You know, you have some from many, many years ago, or you have some other pictures that different ones, or then you have like the kiddie ones, that they learn that it's like, oh, there's Jonah and the whale. I think everyone in our society and culture knows about Jonah. That he was this guy who didn't do what he was supposed to do, and so God had a fish swallow him up, and then he spit him out on dry land. Then he did what he was supposed to do, but he kind of threw a fit about doing it, and everyone's kind of familiar with the story of Jonah. And throughout this series, we'll be looking at various aspects of Jonah's life as we go verse by verse through this book in the Bible that talks about his story and his time here on this earth. And there's so many different opinions on it, from saying Jonah is a real person who really lived and was really in the belly of a whale or a fish or whatever you want to call it, versus he was a guy, maybe he was used figuratively as a teaching illustration, as allegorical, whatever it is. No matter where you're at, anywhere in between, no matter what we draw from all of this throughout this series, I think the one thing that I want to make sure that you and I get from all of this, after hearing Kyle and Kathy's story and even starting this journey of learning about Jonah is this, is that Jonah is just like us. Jonah is just like us. He's a guy that has imperfect motives. He has imperfect thoughts. He has imperfect desires. He is in need of God's grace in his life daily, just like all of us are. And yet, God was able to use him. His boldness, his courage, his sometimes soft heart, his sometimes hard heart, his sometimes his stubbornness. God was able to use all of it for his purposes and for his glory. And I believe God wants to use you, me, us to do the same. To together help more people see the relationship that they were created for in Jesus Christ, or how we would say here is together helping people find new life in Jesus Christ. And so for the next few moments this morning, we're actually not going to read from Jonah chapter 1. We're going to actually take a step back, and what we're going to do is we're going to look at two other instances in our Bibles, one in the Old Testament part of our Bible, one in the New Testament part of our Bible, in which Jonah is referenced. Jonah is talked about. There's short 3 verses in one, 4 verses in the other, and we're going to see how Jonah is just like us in these 2 verses. So if you have a Bible, go ahead and turn to 2 Kings chapter 14. 2 Kings chapter 14, we're going to start in verse 23 in just a moment. If you're grabbing a Bible in the seat back in front of you, it is page 304 as well. You can pull out your devices and get the Bible app on your phone, and throughout our time together this morning, the verses will be up on the screens. And as you're turning there, just want to remind you that here at Avenue, we're going to teach from God's Word every week because we believe God has primarily spoken to us through His Word, the Bible. And not only do we believe God's Word is true, but that it's very applicable in our lives today. So the books of 1st and 2nd Kings in our Bibles, they are historical accounts about a certain portion in Israel's history, about 3,000 years ago. And during this time, 1st and 2nd Kings talk about the kingdom in Israel. For many years, the Israelites did not have a human king, even though all the other nations around them had a king or an emperor or something like that. But it wasn't until King Saul that the Israelites had a king. So there were 3 different kings, Saul, David, Solomon, that you may have heard of before, that ruled Israel, what was known under the United Kingdom, that everyone in Israel was on the same page and they had one king. But then there was a season of time where there was civil war between the nation of Israel. And so there was a northern kingdom and there was a southern kingdom. You can throw that image up on the screen. The northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. Northern kingdom, its capital was Samaria. The southern kingdom, its capital was Jerusalem. A lot of times in Scripture, you hear of the north as referred to as Israel and the south as referred to as Judah. So Jonah is in this time period of living in Israel under a divided kingdom. So in these 3 verses here, 2 Kings chapter 14, verses 23 through 25, we're going to hear a king from the south reference. We're going to hear a king from the north reference. And then we're going to hear just this small little phrase about our guy Jonah. All right, so read with me, chapter 14, starting in verse 23. Here's what it says. In the 15th year of Amaziah, son of Joash, the king of Judah, that's the south, Jeroboam, son of Joash, king of Israel, that's the north, became king in Samaria. That's the capital of the northern kingdom. And Jeroboam, he reigned for 41 years. Now he did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and he did not turn away from any of the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he had caused Israel to commit. That's his grandfather. He was the one who restored the boundaries of Israel from Lebo Hamath to the Dead Sea in accordance with the word of the Lord, the God of Israel, spoken through his servant Jonah, son of Amittai, the prophet from Gath Hepher. So that's all we get from Jonah right here, is that he was a prophet to the evil king in the north. And he had this specific word to give to that king. And that's the role of a prophet in the Old Testament. During the Jewish culture, they had Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the first 5 books of the Bible. They used that as kind of their guidelines to following God and making sure that they kept his commands and his laws. But there are many other things that the Israelites were continuing to learn about who their God was. And God would reveal that many times through a prophet. The prophet's role was to hear from God and then proclaim that word to the people of God. So they hear from God and proclaim that word to the people of God. Now, what's interesting to note is that every single king in the northern kingdom of Israel, you read through 1 Kings, 2 Kings, it has that phrase that we saw about Jeroboam in verse 24, that he did evil in the sight of the Lord. Every single king in the northern part of Israel was evil. They were doing everything against what they were supposed to be doing. They were leading their people further and further and further away from God. And so Jonah, like many other prophets, would get these words from God, and there wasn't necessarily an incentive to say the truth of God to someone who didn't want to hear from God, who was doing his own thing. And so many prophets during the time of Israel, they would say these things and be cast out or be killed for what they had to say. Other prophets would just make up things and tell the king, oh, this is what God says. He's going to bless you. You keep doing what you're doing. And you're doing a great job. And he's going to expand our kingdom. And they would say what they thought the king wanted to hear. But in this instance, this is very unique what Jonah was called to do. He was going to give a good report. He was going to report of a blessing from God to his people that wanted nothing to do with God. You see, they had lost quite a bit of land in the northern kingdom. They had battled different foreign nations and they kept losing battle after battle after battle. Why was that? Well, because God was divinely disciplining them. He would say, if you would turn back to me, I will protect you. I will keep you safe. I will give you the land that I promised to you, the promised land. That's where we get that phrase from. And instead, they rejected him. So God said, okay, I'm going to let these foreign nations come in. They're going to raid. They're going to destroy. They're going to kill. They're going to take over. They're going to make your land smaller and smaller. But in this period of the divided kingdom, Jonah gets a word from God that says, hey, tell the northern kingdom, tell Jeroboam, that I'm actually going to restore some of this land to you. He was giving a word of mercy and grace to a people who did not deserve it, who wanted nothing to do with God. And I think that's one of the two things that we're going to see this morning of how Jonah is just like us. The first one is this. I believe Jonah is just like us is because God works around you. God works around you, around me, around us. See, for Jonah, he had probably received many words from the Lord. And he had seen how his friends, his brothers, his sister, his family wanted nothing to do with God. And yet in the midst of him trying to live for God, in the midst of him trying to honor God, in the midst of him trying to hear the word and proclaim the word and just being met with a stone wall, he gets this word of grace and mercy to give. And he's like, well, okay, well, this could be good. This could turn people back to God. This could then help them return to the Lord and obey him and love him, and maybe Israel will rise to prominence again. He had some hope in all of this. And unfortunately, what we see through the rest of the book of Kings is that Israel consistently wanted nothing to do with God. And yet God was still at work around Jonah. We know throughout the rest of the Old Testament that in the northern kingdom of Israel, there was always what's called a remnant. It was a portion of people who never lost faith in God. And I believe, and many other scholars would also, learn from them and read from what they have to say, is that Jonah and many of these prophets over time continued to do this work that kept that remnant, that portion of people focused on living for God, obeying God, and worshiping God. See, Jonah was looking for the big change to happen. He was hoping all of Israel would turn back to him. And instead, it was only a small little portion. And yet God was still at work around Jonah. God was still changing people's hearts. God was still orchestrating things all over the world so that 700, 800, 900 years later, the world would be put in such a place where it would be a perfect time for the Messiah, for the Savior, Jesus Christ, to come into this world and preach this good news message to everyone. There were empires that were rising and falling throughout this time, and all this was a part of God's plan, and Jonah was in the middle of it, and he didn't even realize it. And I think for many of us here today, that's how our lives feel. That we grow weary of doing good. We grow weary of doing the right thing. We grow weary of being faithful to God. In the midst of a culture or society, it doesn't seem like they want to hear from what God has to say. They want to hear about what God's word has to say. We can get frustrated when we're in the marriage and we're trying to talk and trying to love and trying to listen. It just doesn't seem like it's working. We're in the job where we're having integrity, and yet everyone else who seems to be cutting corners is getting promoted over us. We've given our children to the Lord. We've raised them. We've prayed for them. And now as they get older, it seems like they're not following the Lord and turning away from him. And we're saying, why, God? Like, I've been doing this. I've been praying. What's going on? And if that's how you feel this morning, you can be confident that God's still working around you. It reminds me of that Psalm Waymaker that we've seen here a lot in the bridge of that. And it says, even when we don't see it, he's working. Even when we don't feel it, he's working. Like he never stops. He never stops working. For some of you, my encouragement to you this morning is that just like Jonah, keep fighting the good fight. Keep doing the good work that God has called you to do. Keep loving that neighbor that seems to want nothing to do with Christ. Keep praying for that child and leading them a way that points them to Christ. Keep respecting that boss or that coworker, that person in authority over you, because in your humbleness and your genuine spirit towards them, their heart can be softened to the Lord. Keep praying for that spouse. Keep loving that spouse so that they would turn to Christ. Keep doing what God has called you to do. As Paul says in Galatians 6, don't grow weary of doing good. It reminds me a lot of Kyle and Kathy's story. Like I said, a couple weeks ago, Kyle got to share a lot of that. And one of the things he mentioned is that for 40 years, they were on the mission field, 40 years. But for the first 25 years, how many people came and trusted the Lord? How many people were saved? How many people were reading their Bibles? How many Bible studies, baptisms, salvations? How many of those were happening? None. For 25 years, they're doing this work and doing this work and doing this work, and nothing's happening. And finally, God's able to break through, and lives are able to be changed. And today we get to celebrate God's faithfulness in their lives, because they never gave up. They never stopped working in what God had called them to do. So believe, but just like Jonah, God is always working around you. Now we're going to go to the New Testament real quickly. We're going to go to Matthew chapter 12. It's on page 793 if you're having the Bible and seat back in front of you. And these are Jesus' words. He's teaching to some of the religious leaders of the day who don't want his message, want nothing to do with him, think that he is trying to overtake them and their authority and their power. And they're saying, Jesus, we don't believe you. Jesus, we're trying to go against you. Jesus, we are trying to discredit your ministry. And so it's in these back and forth exchanges that we find ourselves here in Matthew chapter 12. And what Jesus does in his response to these religious leaders is he references and mentions our guy Jonah once again. So Matthew chapter 12, starting in verse 38, it says this. Then some of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law said to him, Teacher, we want to see a sign from you. Not because he hadn't done any miracles yet. He'd been doing them all the time. They just didn't want to believe yet. So verse 39, Jesus answered, A wicked and adulterous generation asks for a sign, but none will be given it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh will stand up at the judgment with just this generation and condemn it. For they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and now something greater than Jonah is here. So these religious leaders, they wanted some hard, cold evidence from Jesus that he was the Messiah, even though he had proven quite a bit to them already. And Jesus says, hey, I will give you a sign. You want your miracle? You want your miraculous vision? Here it is. Just like the prophet Jonah, who was in that belly of a fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so I will be in the ground for 3 days and resurrect after 3 days and 3 nights. Jesus is foreshadowing his death and resurrection, his main purpose, his main mission for coming here to the earth, to live a perfect life, to die on the cross so that my sins and your sins could be forgiven, and then not stay in the grave, but 3 days later, rise from the dead to overcome the power of sin and Satan and shame in my life and in yours. So that when we pass from this world, we can, by faith, spend our eternity in heaven with our Creator and our Savior. And so Jesus says, hey, Jonah's life, you guys know about Jonah. You're the religious leaders. You know front and back, these first 39 books of the Old Testament. You know it up here, but you don't really know it up here. But I'm gonna talk to you right here in your head for a moment. And you know exactly what happened to Jonah, and you know his entire life. And guess what? His life is just a picture. It's a snapshot. It's an opportunity for me to reference it back and say, his life was a part of a greater story of the redemption of all of mankind. See, what Jonah didn't realize in that moment, and sometimes we don't realize in our moments here on this earth, is that God works beyond you. Not only is God working around you, but God works beyond you. You know, I can imagine that Jonah sitting in the belly of the fish for 3 days, praying this prayer to God, wrestling with him, whatever it is thinking to himself, man, my failure and my hard heart, man, God's going to use it for amazing things someday. You know, like he's not sitting in there thinking about, oh, I can't wait for the comeback story in this one. I can't wait for that future Messiah to reference me and use my life in such a way. He's not thinking about any of those things. He just wants to get out of that fish and get on with his work that he doesn't really want to do in the first place. And we'll get to that throughout this series. But all that to say is that your finite life here on this earth, my finite life here on this earth, when we are faithful to God, or even when we fall short, just like Jonah, you better believe God is still going to work beyond you. You better believe that when you pass from this world, if you've been faithful to how God has impacted you, and through his Spirit in your life, you've chosen to live for him and honor him, you better believe that God is going to use your life to impact others beyond your time here on this earth. You know, some of you are products of that. Some of you have grandparents and great-grandparents. Maybe they came over to the States, or maybe they were part of this country, and they responded to the call of Jesus Christ in their life. Maybe they came out of a tightly religious background, or a legalistic background, or a completely different religion, or had no faith in anything, and they were transformed by Christ. And you are the product, and that's part of my story too. I am the product of someone generations ago saying yes to Jesus, trusting in Jesus. This allowed you to be raised in a home that valued God's word, that taught God's word, that lived out God's word, and pointed you to a life-saving, a life-giving relationship with Jesus Christ. Those are things that those people will never get to see, never get to experience here on this earth, because they're already with their Savior. But for some of you, you're first-generation Christians, maybe second-generation, first-generation Christians, where you're just starting your faith in Christ, or you're just growing your faith in Christ, or you're the only one in your home who is following Jesus. And maybe they have some religious affiliation, but they call you the crazy one because you read your Bible every day, or you read your Bible every other day. Or it's like, wait, you go to church more than Christmas and Easter? Like, what's wrong with you? Like that's where you're at right now. And some days it's hard. It's hard to live for Christ. It's hard to follow Jesus. It's hard to say, man, this new life in Christ is not all that's cracked up to be. And if that's you, I want to encourage you today that just like Jonah, you're not going to be perfect. You're going to fall short. You're going to make mistakes. Join the club in that, okay? But believe that God will work beyond you. That you can set that example for generations and generations to come. And maybe it's not just in your family, but maybe it's with your neighbors and you're impacting that family. Or maybe it's with your coworkers, or maybe it's with people in your schools, or whatever it is. We don't know, but when we choose to consistently pursue Jesus in our lives, believe that God is going to use that faithfulness to him in a way that impacts others, that you and I won't see on this side of heaven, that you and I won't see on this side of eternity. But we go throughout Scripture and we see this take place. Some of you right now, you're already thinking about that person or that family or that coworker or that neighbor who introduced you to Christ. And there's people 2 or 3 times back from that person who impacted them. And you are the spiritual fruit of their faithfulness years and years ago. And so believe that your faithfulness, your commitment to Christ will not be void. God will continue to work beyond you, just like he did here with Jonah. And so I'm going to invite the worship team to come back out. And in a moment, Kyle is going to come back up. He's going to lead us in taking communion together as we remember the greatest act of redemption in our history, Jesus' death and resurrection. But Brandon's going to come out, and he's going to sing a song over us. It's called Jonah's Prayer. And it's based off of that portion in Jonah's story where he's in the belly of the fish and he's just praying to God. And this is an opportunity for us then to do the same thing that Jonah did in that moment. Every week when we come here, we do this thing where we reflect on our own hearts. Is there something that is pulling me away from God? Is there something that is causing me to grow weary in doing good? Is there something that I am doing to push God away? This is an opportunity to reflect on where our hearts are at this morning and then turn to him in repentance, asking for forgiveness, and then asking for the strength to turn from how we were living, how we were acting, how we were thinking. There's some communion cups in the seat back holders in front of you that you can hold on to. In a moment, we'll take them together as a church family when Kyle leads us. But I want you to take this time now to reflect, to think about what God has done and how God is working around you, how God will work beyond you. So don't grow weary today, church family. God sees you, he knows you, and he's calling you to be faithful today.